All right, well, welcome everybody. It is Wednesday, April 13th, 2022. Only 8 years to 2030, which is probably the go date for a lot of folks that are trying to save the planet. 8 years are going to go by really fast. So I wish everybody luck on saving 40 gigatons of CO2. Today's my daughter's birthday, and we have a gorgeous day in Austin, Texas. It's a little warm. I think spring came and went. It lasted a couple of days. We're already in summertime. It's 91 degrees. We have a great guest today, but before we get rolling here, Dr. Butler has some musica.
Yesterday, all my troubles seem so far away. Now it looks as if they're here to stay. Oh, I believe yesterday.
Right. Thank you, John.
You're
So,
welcome.
John, how's it going? Semester is coming along. COVID
The
is
mess is
still.
coming along because we thought we had another terrorist event in New York. The economy itself is bubbling along. The war is going really, really interesting, out of control. It looks like we're back in the World War II. People do not want to go back physically to work, which is the biggest management issue these days. People like to study why people do not want to go back to work. And then, of course, you have the virus that seems to be coming back in our great city of Philadelphia. So I guess things have always been a mess, but it's really a mess now. It's a lot to think about, a lot of telephone calls to think about, and in the middle of all of this, of course, is the inflation, the price of things. So, Andres, it has been interesting in the since the virus began.
So I'm gonna come back. I'm gonna say hello to the guys, but I want to come back to you on a bunch of things that I have a question for you. But Llewellyn, how are you, sir?
I'm very well, thank you. I think I always find it interesting when Johnny finds it interesting. That probably means it's somebody else's total catastrophe, and things are pretty unsettled at the moment. We have runaway inflation, very high. I think the wholesale price index came in at over 11%, which is, to my mind, very high indeed. We're in a great period of adjustment. It would have happened anyway. It's mostly a hangover from the COVID-19 and the consequences to the supply chain of that disruption, now vastly enhanced by the new disruption, which is the war in Europe. And we don't know where all that ends, but what we do know is there will be considerable pressure on raw materials, considerable pressure on food, and pressure on energy, which means that until we get an adjustment, until we get used to living with the new real, things are going to be very disturbingly expensive. And as always, it will hurt the poor and those on fixed incomes the most. Eventually, we'll work through it, and a new time of more limpid existence will come into being. I am reminded about Norman McRae, who was the creator of the Modern Economist magazine, and he was its deputy editor, but he was its ideas man. I brought him to Washington during the energy crisis in 1974 to give a speech, and he stood up in the Shoreham Hotel and he said, "I don't know why Llewellyn has invited me here. It seems very simple. The price of energy will go up, the supply will increase, poof, there'll be no crisis. Should we talk about something interesting?" Well, of course, all that happened, that the adjustment in its happening was brutal and rough. There are winners, there are losers, but for the moment, it is an unsteady and uncertain world in which the future is not known. I am disturbed and worried about, I suppose it's a bit pretentious to say I'm worried about, but certainly interested in seeing what happens to vital raw materials as we move towards a total electric economy. There are going to be shortages of nickel, copper, lithium, etc. It's not going to be a smooth transition. And in the course of it, we may create new OPECs.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Great insights, guys. We're going to come back to these topics. We have a great guest today, an old friend, Lawrence Latham. And Lawrence, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
So
Tell us, where are you today?
I am in Rotterdam, the Netherlands, and this is water. But after that, those intros by these two fine gentlemen, I think I may need to switch to something harder.
Little Genève.
Well, before we get rolling here, let me introduce you formally for those that are listening and watching that don't know you. So Lawrence Latham is the Chief Executive Officer of EveryNet, which is headquartered in the Netherlands, as he just stated. And prior to his role, he was the Chief Operating Officer of EveryNet. And before EveryNet, he was Senior Strategies for M2M and IoT at James Burns and Associates, Strategy Advisor at Solaire, CMO at Streams Technologies, Chief Customer Offices at ILS Technology, founder of Stealth Networks, founder of Uptime Devices, CEO of Mail.com, and president of Area. He's definitely a serial entrepreneur, a high-tech guru, and we're happy to have you. Welcome again, Lawrence.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. So, Lawrence, you travel the world. You're running a company that is doing some cool stuff. Before we get into EveryNet and what you guys are doing, which is all enablement of telecom, the new paradigms and all that, what's your sense from COVID, lessons learned from COVID? Has COVID accelerated the digitalization of the world? Has it helped out your business? Has it hurt the business? And then the second part of the question, real quick, high level, how do you see 2022? Is it gonna be a great year for you? Is it gonna be an okay year? What's your thoughts?
Okay, well, thanks for all those questions. So one of the analogies I like to give, because our business, we're multinational, we're way past the startup phase. We're, in hyper scale up right now. And since the start of the pandemic, it's felt like real life Donkey Kong, where in the game of Donkey Kong, he stands up and he throws hot flaming barrels of oil at you. I remember in the .com days, every day you get up, it's the Wild Wild West. These days, pandemic, we have our operations do span the globe, Indonesia, Brazil, Europe, US. And so just today, our chief marketing officer was just now able to visit our operations in Indonesia for the first time since 2020. And that's a fledgling operation, and trying to do that by wire, right? Trying to fly by wire, doing that is a challenge. Then we get supply chain things, the lack of MCUs and processors and things like that, which makes it a longer lead cycle for people to develop devices to get on our networks, things like that. And then the war. We have actually, one of our marketing people lives in Ukraine. One of our key suppliers, their engineering group, was in Ukraine. They're big supporters of it. And they were able to get their people out, help us get our person's daughter out, 16-year-old daughter out, but she then went back. And she stayed there, and she's part of the resistance. So very unusual times. There's the old saying, what they don't teach you in business school. Pardon me, John. But so, all the things you don't learn in college, it's like, I've been hit with all of them in the past couple of years, us and the executive management team. But so it's been very interesting. Now, what it has done is it has increased the urgency for digital transformation at all kinds of companies. I actually got a call this morning from one of the largest petrochem companies in the world that's based in the Middle East, Asia, and they said, hey, we've already done all of our POCs. We've already done this. We're ready to go to full production now. We want you to come and help us. And I asked questions, and they said, well, because of COVID, we couldn't access things. In Indonesia, just things as simple as being able to read an electricity meter when people can't go out of their houses, you're dead in the water. So, I don't feel gleeful about it, but it certainly has accelerated the pace of digital transformation. And we're one bit of technology. There's no one size fits all in this. And so, we're seeing it across the board, not just us, but others, whether it might be, 5G, private LTE, CBRS, whatever it is, people now, it's imperative that they do that. And then, they've seen what happens with supply chains. 70, 80% of the supply chain isn't digitized. Where is a pallet? About a year ago, they found $1 million worth of bottled water in Puerto Rico sitting in a warehouse. Wasn't any corruption, just lost $1 million worth of bottled water. But had those pallets been tracked, something very simple, we would have found that. But you can't plug those in, so there's got to be solutions for that. Containers are not tracked. So there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that we can actually go get together. And for me, it's not so much about competing technologies. IoT, I have a different definition of it. It's interoperable open things, right? Sometimes we don't even use the internet, right? And so bringing all those things to bear to solve some of these problems, and it's doable. And not just for logistics, but you talked about 2030 and climate change, sustainability, all the ESG stuff, there are opportunities to do it. I think, and it's not a matter of technology. It's not even a matter of money. It's a matter of will to get it done. And if anything, over the past couple of years, that's where we've seen the biggest difference.
Gotcha, guys.
Yes, I learned very interesting. I had last week, I had opportunities to have a long talk with one of Llewellyn King's colleagues, George Will, who we had him speaking at the University of Texas. We talked a lot about Schumpeter. We talked about the supply chain. We talked a lot about how things are destroyed and created. What we learned, I think, and what you learned during this pandemic is that something needs to be done about the supply chain. Should it be localized? It will be digitized, so we'll know where everything is. And as you know, there is a movement afoot to get the supply chain, quote, back to the Western Hemisphere going forward. Everything from the plug-ins for digital automobiles or electric cars to the things that we use every day, like toothpaste and toothbrush. So as we think about the disruption of the supply chain, and when you say that there's a digital transformation, I'm interested. I have books on technology transfer, Lawrence, so it's dear to my heart. How do you see going forward? What should we do with the supply chain now that we know war is disrupted, pandemics disrupted? Should we go more local now? How should we have substitute products for things? We're working now with silicon, and we're looking at how can wood pieces, by the way, conduct electricity also. Going forward, what should the scientists be concerned with? What should we change?
Before Lauren, before you answer, add to the answer the economics of your networks, LoRaWAN footprint nationwide, and what would that do if everybody were to agree to be your customer?
Right. Okay. And let me get to that first. So one of the things that's interesting, I think Llewellyn mentioned something about the Economist magazine. There's been a lot of articles in there the past couple of weeks about the end of globalization. I think even, BlackRock Capital, maybe, I think the guy was even talking about that. And it's interesting for me, I grew up getting to do international business and starting to see it all come together and work. I've gotten to go to China and all these things, but, certainly things like when you can't get PPE and you're depending on somebody else that potentially is your enemy, and that, they could weaponize that. And then it's interesting, I'll bring up Puerto Rico again. Puerto Rico is an island where we create, most people don't realize it's huge in pharmaceuticals, and we've got that right there. And so we do have an opportunity to, I guess, nearshore or use some of our own things. So I would think going forward, there should be some sort of balance. The world, to both of the gentlemen's points in the opening, is way out of kilter, way out of balance right now. As one of my Dutch friends says, it's gone lopsided. But so I do see that. When it comes to the technology like we have, it's opening the door. It's ultra low cost, ultra low power. You don't need to plug in and charge things. Batteries last forever. The price is a fraction of cellular. And so, part of making all these things happen is, driving down the cost of all of it, like people have done with WhatsApp, like Hotmail, all those things. We need to continue, whether it's not really Moore's law, but we need to continue to drive down the price of things to make it realistic. You know why we don't track pallets today? Because you can't plug in a pallet. The technology didn't exist. The costs were too high. The data plan was more than the pallet. With technology like EveryNet has today in our networks, and other companies, it's not just us. There's companies like Orange and KPN have this capability. We have the opportunity now because TCO, ROI, they come into play. Economics, you can't ignore them no matter how much we need something. Still has to make, economic sense. So from that standpoint, the ability to digitize a pallet, a container, we bring that to bear. Things like water, where there is no electricity, the ability to be able to monitor and manage that. Something like, depending around the world, and I feel a little like preaching the Pope, Genesis 1.1, but talking to you about utilities and things like that. But between 40 and 60% of any city in the world's water is lost. Although I'm sure there are people yelling at me from the Netherlands that no, they do good. But it's a precious resource. We have to do better with that. And so it does allow us the affordability, not just the technology, but the affordability to now manage these precious resources.
Yeah, Llewellyn?
Yes, absolutely fascinating. As a layman to the computer world, how do you digitize things? I mean, what is the most portable, most obscure sort of thing that can be digitized, and how does that work?
I love to bring up the wooden pallet because it is just wood.
That's a very good subject for me because I know something about pallets. I have an interest in printing, or used to, and pallets are a very important part of printing. That's how we move embryonic books around.
Absolutely. Every consumer good in the world moves around on a pallet that comes from a pallet pooler, a commercial grade pallet, but it's wood. I was at a pallet convention, and this guy has a cube, and he's talking about this wooden cube for 20 minutes while I'm standing in line waiting to talk to him. I'm like, what possibly could they be? Here's the measurements, here's the kind of wood, what else? But so something like and I apologize to my friends in the pallet business, a dumb wooden pallet, how can we bring that intelligence, right? Because all of a sudden, that the first thing we need to do, and I always believe in crawl, walk, run. First thing we need to do is, where is the darn thing? Can we just find the pallet of water in Puerto Rico? Now, let's say it's a pallet of TVs. I'll go with Samsung since I tend to buy those, but hopefully I'll get an endorsement out of this. You have a pallet of Samsung TVs, and it's going through a warehouse, and then all of a sudden at 3:15 on April 13th, the orientation turned to the side. So now what we can begin to do, or it could be fruit or something like that, contextualize what is on the pallet with the goods on the goods on the pallet with the pallet, location, handling, things like that, so we know who's responsible. Then we take it up one layer, and using the 80-20 rule, let's say there are 100 million smart pallets in the US. On any day, 80% of those should be in utilization. Well, guess what? Today, only 60% moved, right? And I'm just making up numbers, but okay, only 60% moved. What's going on? Then think about the heat maps that clever guys like you guys could do that show, oh, wait, they're moving over here, but they're not moving in the Northwest. Why is that? You know, what products? And you can start through data analytics to glean all sorts of information, right? And so, yeah, we know where our water is. We know it's been sitting there a year, and now, you know, we can start to say why it wasn't picked up or this or that. So some very, very interesting things with something as simple as a dumb wooden pallet. Sorry, Roberto, if you're watching this. So.
Well, Lawrence, let me just add to that and how powerful that is. I'm working with a company now called Landris, and they're putting radio frequency identification on every piece of linen for hotels, so they'll know exactly where it is. There will be no more West. It's called Landris. The entrepreneur is called Don Ward. He was named as one of the top entrepreneurs in America. But can you imagine now? He's working with hotels. Llewellyn, they'll know when towels will wear out, when pillowcases will wear out, where they are, when do they need to order. And he has told the big chains, don't worry about linen anymore. I'll let you know when they need to be washed. I'll let you know that we have a new name for Andreas, the Pope of Utilities. The Pope of Utilities is a new name. But all of a sudden, if we know where everything it is, excuse me, Llewellyn, it becomes more efficient. Llewellyn does not take good to that term, efficient.
The need for chaos, the need for creativity, these things I mentioned week after week to Johnny Butler, but I don't seem to be getting through to him. A certain amount of chaos is very creative. He wants everything reduced to analyze data, at which point it ceases to be interesting. It becomes functional. I'm hoping to improve the spiritual side of his life somewhat, but I'm failing abysmally.
Well, all I can say is that the spirit is a great analog. That's all I can tell you.
Lawrence.
Oh,
it's a great algorithm.
Johnny, you get one with that. You get one for that. I'd like to ask you, Lawrence, you mentioned ESG, which is the new religion. Is it dangerous like religion?
Wow. It's interesting. Anything, you know, moderation is what I would preach. But you know, there do have, everything is in balance, right? You know, the moderation thing isn't a joke. It is in balance. How do we, you know, my wife, when she goes to the store, she can't believe how much plastic is used in places that are, it's organic and you think you're going someplace healthy and doing something good, and there's so much plastic you just can't imagine. So, you know, I think that we have a lot of room for that before we get there. You know, it's interesting in our world today, and being, it happened to us just last night watching a European football game. You know, there was a commercial for the Green EU. And I actually said to my wife, if we were in America, half the people in the room would be complaining that this was socialism. And in this case, they were doing good things, and it was about packaging as well. So certainly people can go overboard. I think, you know, my own personal opinion, where we are today, we have a long way to go before we go overboard. But, you know, the biggest challenge to me is that we live in such a polarized world, and people think it's just the US. It's not, right? You know, we're seeing that. I see, as I travel around, I see the polarization. It's certainly very, you know, bright in the US. And, you know, people want freedom and don't want to be forced to do things. But, you know, so if it's anything is dangerous, it's not the technology, it's the people and the politics, you know, and trying to strike a balance where, you know, can't we all just get along?
I think that
I'd like to add sorry, Andres, a bit of a follow-up. I want to understand how your product works, Lawrence. You digitize something, how do you manage it? Where is it? Where is the information that you glean, the data? Where is it fed to? Who pays for it? How is it centralized? How is it collated? How does it end up?
Excellent question, and thank you for asking, Llewellyn. You know, my whole time, you know, Andres read off that list of jobs I've had that make me feel very old. You know, the whole time people talk about, you know, telcos, that they're trying to avoid being the dumb pipe. And the type of technology we have, LoRaWAN, it's for very small messages. So not only am I now the dumb pipe, I'm a very small dumb pipe, a very thread thin, and it sends short messages off on what's the meter reading, those type of things. What we do is we built a network because of the ultra low cost and the ultra low ARPUs. It is economically not feasible to build a network in a country the size of the US. And Andres, you sent out some new stuff before, just today, and one of those was about Sigfox has gone broke in the US. And the problem is they tried to do a model where they went and build a network. We'll buy stuff, we'll put it up. They went broke before they could do anything. So what we need is massive scale. And what we do is we build a neutral host network that others can share. We don't go to end customers ourselves directly. We do help our sales channel partners, but we work with the hyperscalers, companies like Microsoft and the AWS. We work with the cable companies, companies like Charter. We work with MVNOs, mobile virtual network operators, people that specialize in IoT and data. And we provide this network to them along with the ecosystem at ultra low cost. And the cost, you know, one of our founders, he loves the concept of the sharing economy. And what we're doing, it's a shared resource, right? We just build it, deploy it, manage it, and then let everybody go exploit it.
Yeah.
Then, so we're that piece of connectivity, right? My job is to route data, and I route that data to the cloud, to people that are using, you know, big data for analytics. For example, SAS, the analytics company, also a partner of Microsoft. We're working together with them on smart cities projects around flood control to know, hey, the water's coming up. Let's get people, let's start to mitigate and things like that. So our job is to be that neutral host network and enable all these smart people to go and build solutions, because the analytics, you know, everybody talks about big data. Well, the analytics machine, they are hungry beasts, and they only get their data from sensors. And our job is to go get the vast variety of things that haven't been digitized yet and help feed that data into the machine.
Yeah. Let me sort of try to put a wrapper on this and try to make the case for an accelerated digital transformation. And I'm going to go back to John on some first answers on this. But Johnny, it seems to me that the key that we're witnessing here is an acceleration through digitalization of what I would call a shift, a dramatic shift on how we measure success. we have always been enamored in Wall Street because of the nature of the 90-day quarter to show return on investments. You know, I want to show the quick return on the investment. Interestingly enough, John, and you'll be able to chime in here deeply. I think that finally, with digitalization of everything, with a global network like EveryNet, tracking every asset possible, the notion of shifting to return on assets and making return on assets the main figure, the main decision driver for everything we do. So if you think about the definition, right, return on asset is all about how investors measure the effectiveness of a company. The higher the return on asset, the more efficient and the higher the flywheel of the creation of wealth. So think about the utility industry. The utility industry builds its infrastructure to deliver peak capacity, and whenever peak capacity is needed. But half of the time, or less than half of the time, the asset is utilized at 100% capacity, right? So we are wasting an incredible amount of assets. All of us having 3 cars in the garage, a lawnmower, a saw, right? This is where the gig economy comes in, right? So am I wrong to think, John, that the world would be a significantly better place if EveryNet was tracking every asset every day and we all had the data for it?
I think so. It's interesting. We can digitize things, but we have to add to that. So let me just go over your model. What you're saying is that we should have a return on assets. That is, look at everything that we have, everything is digitized, and then we can actually measure the usefulness of the return to value that we have. I have a good friend at MIT named Professor Pentland, and he did a book called Social Physics. And with the Internet of Things also becomes the digitization of people. That is, if you think about what you just said, and if we think about how businesses, what make business enterprise go, we have to have a combination or an interaction between a return on assets and still the return on people. And in his book on social physics, what he did in his laboratory, he got a significant number of people, thousands of people, to just let me track your cell phone as an experiment. And he was able to look at not only the return on assets, but also what people did without asking them, how they interacted with assets without asking them. But more importantly, how can you combine the return on assets that you're talking about with investment in people? So assets themselves will not stand alone as an independent variable. It would be interactive with what we call the individuals themselves. So I think we try to do that in our homes already. That is, if we can now measure how efficient, if you will, our thermostat is, if we can measure how efficient our garage door is, how efficient everything is, we say, what is this costing me? So can you imagine if we could literally write the equation for the return on every asset and give every American a number of actually what that means, whether it's index or whether it's individual number. But I say I like it, but you have to have the digitization, not the OOT, but the digitization of people. And by the way, Lawrence, if I had your cell phone data, if I had everybody's cell phone data, I don't need to know what you're doing, but I can predict what you will do in the future based on the patterns that all of the data that we have. And then I can combine this with credit card data, face recognition data, match it all, and create those networking effects that we have in the Internet of Things now. So I like it, but it has to be with also the return on individuals, and individuals need to be measured also. So we need the IOP, the Internet of People.
Right.
Using their cell phone. Lawrence, you're smiling. Lawrence, you like that?
I do like that. What was the name of that book, by the way?
Social Physics.
Okay.
So
Llewellyn doesn't like it, but I
I
like it.
don't like that at all. I
Well, let me tell you about
actively and
social physics
vigorously dislike that,
1800s.
because any privacy, any individuality, you become a number. This is really,
Llewellyn,
this
I'm
is not what the
unless
human
you blow
race
up something. I don't
aspires
care
to be.
about you unless you blow up something.
I beg your pardon, sir?
I'm not interested in your individual data unless you commit a crime. And then I can say, yeah.
But a crime, but crimes are very subjective
You're right.
things. There are a whole set of things when I was a boy that were crimes, like sex between consulting adults of the same sex was a crime. Now it is not a crime. So crimes are subjective. So data based on a criminal record is inaccurate by its very nature because it has a human judgment that established what was a crime. Smoking pot is not a crime where I am today, but 5 years ago it was. So when you can deal with what is a crime, then you can tell me whether it is justified in tracking an individual and ascribing to their personal record that they are a criminal or not a criminal or have committed an act of antisocial conduct.
Llewellyn, I hate to tell you, we have so much data on everybody now. But I'm not interested in crime. I'm just interested in your data. Now, if you commit a crime, then I got you right away.
So let me interrupt this diversion here. These guys, I'm telling you, Lawrence, watch out.
This is very central. This is not a diversion, sir. This is truly and absolutely central
No.
to human existence in the digital age.
Time out. I don't disagree with what you're saying, Llewellyn. I'm trying to make a point, and I don't want to lose the thread here. I want Lawrence to chime in. We started talking about ESG, sustainability. The reason why the world needs to change, and is changing with digitalization, decentralization, and decarbonization, is because the way we have built the world is unsustainable. And if we continue on the path that we are, we will blow up ourselves. So I'm just trying to connect the dots on the fact that digitalization of every asset that we use and the information to make our lives easier, our costs cheaper, our transactions smarter, and our life more efficient on return on assets means that if you want ESG to be available and for all the problems that ESG is trying to solve, you want every net to have a network in every country, in every county, in every city, tracking every asset. What do you think of that, Lawrence?
Within reason, our technology won't track everything, right? And in IoT, there's no one size fits all. There's no panacea. And like I talked about, it's getting things interoperability and the ability to work together. So. Conceptually sounds good. Could we probably find some things that it doesn't make sense, just like anything else? Probably sure. Yes. But where we are on the spectrum right now, we're way down next to E, and we need to come up. How far that pendulum needs to go, I'm probably not the expert. My guess is. One of these guys wearing ties knows better than me.
So let me come back to something real quick that I wanted to talk to you all, and I'll start with Llewellyn. Llewellyn, explain to me. You are our king of record. Explain to me how is it possible that we have oil at 100%, $100, inflation at the highest possible. Sales of electric vehicles at the highest possible, gasoline at the highest prices ever. There are wars going on. How is it possible that all the numbers are peaking at the same time? How is that possible?
Because there's an imbalance between supply and demand. I think that's very straightforward. The imbalance was created partially by the COVID and exacerbated by the war, and by the unknown quantity of fear and the ability of markets to act irrationally when fear is present. You're not going to bring any of these things down quickly, not while there's a war raging. They will come down or they will stabilize more quickly when the war is over. But we have changed the world. The world is not the place we have been in. We don't go to offices to work. We drive electric vehicles, and there's a huge effort to drive more. That produces new supply constraints. Lithium, the primary source of mobile batteries. It has to be lithium because it's light. You can't use lead acid. You can't use iron air. You can't use a lot of other battery technologies. And incidentally, lead acid is coming back as a very desirable way for utility scale storage, because we know a lot about them and you can recycle them. You can't easily recycle lithium. Anyway, so there you have it. You have one of these classic perfect storms where everything came together to disorganize the markets of the world. And markets are very simple. If you're in a simple village and you eat a lot of potatoes in that village, and there's a supply of 5 bags of potatoes and you need 6, the price of potatoes is out of sight. If you have 7 bags, the price of potatoes is very low indeed, and some may rot. That is markets. That's what we are up against, is markets adjusting to the reality of today.
John, what do you think? Why is this all happening at the same time and it's irrational?
Well, I think it's cumulative in one way. That is, we know that if we put the variables in the equation, we have the supply chain that was disrupted by the pandemic. And then we have the natural flow of what the prices can do up and down, especially now that we have a war. But more importantly, it's what we haven't done that's important. So we can look at all the things of what causes it, but we never learn. So we know, for example, that we should be as independent as we can when it comes to energy and when it comes to the price of oil. And as Llewellyn is right, everything essentially has a market. But markets are also created. There's the political elements of market, and there's the political interference with markets. So I agree with Llewellyn that it certainly was a perfect storm. It was a storm of politics, it's a storm of the supply chain and the pandemic, and it's the reality of war. But we must learn to plan for these things. One of the things that we haven't done is to look at what happened in the past and plan for those things. So the question is, do we have enough petroleum in the Western world? And the answer is yes. Can we drill in the Western world? And the answer is yes. So I think that it was a perfect storm, but I think that we could predict that the perfect storm was coming if we had utilized the lessons of history. That the greatest teacher in the world is this: you cannot see the future unless you look backwards. I cannot look at the price of tomatoes unless I can look backwards and see what happens to the prices of tomatoes. That is, I want to predict them. There are data and there's a curve for everything. And the price of petroleum should be no different. So here we are, stuck again in the 1980s, stuck again, if you will, in the 1990s, arguing about what happens to the price of petroleum. My friends in Houston are loving it because the price of a barrel of oil is now $100, and they just loving every bit of it, right? But I think Llewellyn is right. It was a perfect storm, but we have not been able to go in and change what the perfect storm. I love using what the airlines have done. I use that analogy all the time. If we know why the 747 crashed in Dallas, Texas, then we should fix it. And financial markets are a little different, but we certainly can fix things in the future more so than now. So it was the perfect storm, but we have to be able to go in and change the perfect storm for the future.
Right. I wanna kind of press on a different angle in coming back to Everynet, and the notion that maybe is because we're in a transition where we're living the old paradigm and a new world order on a digitized scale like never before is emerging. And this is just a transition of a crisis-driven austerity, diminishing returns based on the old paradigm. As we push forward, we Texas State are doing a lot of R&D, opening these labs, and Everynet is a founding member, and we are excited about helping Texas, which is the hottest economy in the US, really accelerate the digitalization of asset tracking using their networks. And so based on that, Lawrence, what are your thoughts on your footprint in Texas, what are your plans, and tell the audience why you joined Cedar, and what are you hoping to accomplish?
Okay, thank you. Before I answer that question, I will point out we all start with the pandemic. But one of the interesting things that happened just a few years before that was also a rash of tariffs, a tariff war. And that same thing happened in 1930, the Smoot-Hawley, I think it is. So I think sometimes we may not be looking back, and like most things, it's many variables. It's all the things we said, plus we are going through, we've hit an inflection point for digitization, and anytime you have change, you have pain, right? So you know what? It's all these things. And man, I'll vote for you, John, if you promise to go fix all that stuff. But anyway, now back to your question. Why did we join Cedars? Because, so with our technology that we use, LoRaWAN, it's prevalent everywhere in the world but the US. And it's kind of like the guy from The Hangover that was missing his tooth or something, right? The movie, without the US, you don't have a global network, and I'm not just being, ectocentric, it's true, right? And so we saw that need, we came and we did that. But it is a huge undertaking, because this is not just, going from 4G to 5G or something like that. It's a totally different technology with different use cases. It needs a different ecosystem, and again, it's not one size fits all. I mean, it takes a village. For us, we have to develop solutions. I mean, the first challenge is education. Right? It may sound, I'm talking to you, but the first challenge is education, letting people know what it is, that it's available, etc. The next is being able to show people use cases, and then being able to give credible, independent, third-party information, because it's not just about tracking goods for us, it is also about utilities and security. Llewellyn talked about privacy, but you go talk to a utility, they're worried about security, somebody hacking in. You need resiliency. Look at the Texas ice storm, right? All that there. And so no one company has been able to do it on a global basis. There's no global cell phone carrier, so why would you think you could do this all by yourself? You can't. It's an open standard with an alliance with a huge ecosystem, but it takes partnerships with universities. And I'll tell people you gave me $20 to say this, but the vision at Texas State, what you have and what you put together, when I go and show that to people in our industry, they're blown away. And for me, it's a very high priority to make sure it's successful. And by the way, you're not just LoRa, and the same thing you sent out, you've built a private 5G network. It's about bringing all those to bear. And I'll give you a quick example. In Malaysia, we did a smart airport. It's 5G. It's the only sensors are LoRa, so it's backhauling that. The servers are very happy with the latency, right? So that's good. We use in South America, we work on projects with like Telefonica for mining, where they use private LTE as the backhaul, and the sensors down in the mine are LoRa. So for us, getting back to why did we join Cedars, is because it's a necessary part of the ecosystem. We love what you're doing with public and private, because we need smart engineers to come, and people that know the technology. We need people doing projects proving that it works and all that thing too. But when we've been at events, you're bringing together communities of people that have common needs and common interests, and connecting the synapses together, right? And so for us, it's necessary, and what you're doing is very impressive, and that'll be $40 because I said it twice.
It is. Let me add to that. One of the things you mentioned, Lawrence, you mentioned education, and I was talking to this with Steve Banner some years back. Look, we need another type of education. You know, we are in America now that knows nothing about manufacturing, which is just 5D printing, 3D printing, all right? We're in America now where cities do not even think of 3D printing for manufacturing. So we were to bring a lot of the quote manufacturing and interact it with what Andre is doing at Texas State. Then you can have a whole new bonanza of job creation in cities. But I can tell you this, Lawrence, there's nobody thinking about manufacturing, future manufacturing, not the old time manufacturing that we used to have. I mean, computer manufacturing with algorithms that say, draw this and the computer prints out a refrigerator. Nobody is thinking of that. So I think that what I like about what Andreas is doing, we need a whole nother way of thinking about adding to the education that we have. Because this is not the 20s and the 30s and the 40s where General Motors themselves or Ford Motor Company actually created their engineers, right? They are dependent upon our education system to produce their engineers. And sometimes that education system might be a little bit behind industry, as I think it is in the IoT bit. So I think that one of the questions we got to ask, what will manufacturing look like in the future in America? And certainly we can't do everything globally, but what role will manufacturing play in America? Lawrence, that's the question.
That's a good question. And, you know, back to the thing where people are trying to nearshore, right? Intel, from the standpoint of chips, you know, and that's more high tech than, you know, 3D printing houses. You know, they are investing. I think even in Ohio, they're, you know, $100 billion. And so, you know, there will be some of those things happening. And I'm going to take your point and modify it a bit. You know, if you think about an electronic world or this digital world, it's really an electromechanical world. And one of the places I see the biggest gaps is in our trades, right? And I like in Scotland, you take a test and they figure out, oh, wow, you have an aptitude to become a plumber. You have an aptitude to become a computer scientist. And they send you to a college or a university, depending on how that goes. And by the way, I think they're probably, right now, a plumber in Austin is probably making more than a guy with a computer science degree, is my guess. But, you know, when you look at that world, if you see the escalator, you see the elevators of today. Oh, I mean, half the time I go through an airport now, half the moving sidewalks or whatever are broken. When you think about a robotic world or electromechanical world with all these atomic, who's going to fix this stuff, right? That's a huge gap. And so I do have a speech that I give on, you know, the transformation of the workplace, that people think jobs are going away and we're just going to have to pay people to stay at home. Maybe, you know, there's some generational gap, but we're going to have to find people that can do this. In your 3D printed house, who's going to install the plumbing? And that to me is a huge problem, I think, is getting these skilled trade people that can do things I can't do with my hands. That I know what it's supposed to do, but I don't have that talent, right?
Yeah.
So I agree.
So for me, that's the biggest concern.
Like, in America, you can play golf with to Florida to a golf school, but that's about it.
I think you're so absolutely right. I also was interested in what Johnny said about industries training their own. In Europe, the airlines train their own pilots. They take them in high school and ask them if they want to be pilots. They may move them to Arizona because it's a better place to fly, but nonetheless, they're sort of indentured to the airline. In this country, we scrounge for pilots who come out of the Air Force or might have gotten a license on the GI Bill or something, and then have to train them up. It's much more haphazard in the US, but it seems to me entirely reasonable that, say, building contractors would identify schools that they favor and fund them. I've done some work with a thing called the American College of Building Arts in in South Carolina, which is actually a liberal arts college that teaches a trade, teaches stone cutting, blacksmithing, fine carpentry, framing carpentry. It's fabulous. It is one of the most exciting colleges I've ever been to, because so many people who are forced through the liberal arts system don't know what they're going to do at the end of it. These kids know. I talked to a young woman who was doing blacksmithing, working at a forge, 2,000-degree temperatures, happy. And she'll always work. In that college, which is very small, the number of graduates who start their own businesses is about 1/3. I bet the number of graduates who start their own business out of a normal liberal arts college is about less than 1%, because they don't have a marketable skill. I think we should try to produce people with a marketable skill. You know, I think that's very important. I think you're both onto something very critical.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let me pause real quick before we finish our thoughts here. I want to share real quick my screen and talk about our Digital 360 Summit, which is coming up in September. And I look forward to having you all. This is the companies that sponsor, spoke, and keynoted in 2021. We're looking forward to having the EveryNet team join us in September. I want to thank Texas State University and all the work that we're doing at Cedar. We briefly talked about some of the labs, and EveryNet is driving us in the Smart Networks Lab and impacting all these verticals. And I want to thank Texas State for sponsoring the Digital Roundtable today, as always. Lawrence, when you think about the next 90 days, the next 6 months, and EveryNet, anything that you can share in terms of your growth and your new focus for 2022? Anything that is going on that worth sharing for us?
Yeah. So one of the things that we're doing is a roadshow for all the municipalities, cities, federal, state, local that we cover. We made an announcement last week. We're up to 370 cities, as well as I think 130 logistics points like airports, ports, things like that. And so for us, the next 6 months are all about education and getting that out there. We do have some anchor clients that will be using things for pallet, for water metering and things like that. So we want to build on that and scale that. But for us, it's all about education over the next 3 to 6 months. And by the way, John, I'm not sure if you noticed, I think Llewellyn snuck in a compliment to you.
I noticed
It's
it.
withdrawn.
That's why I've been so silent. I'm just not completely off of my feet. He has a way with words, though. He has a way. I told him I use all of his editorials in my class, but I put my name on them.
Hey, John, you remember all the work that you did for the insurance industry. Don't you think that the insurance industry would be a great customer of EveryNet by providing a way of managing all the assets?
Absolutely, because the insurance industry is about underwriting. Okay, and the insurance industry is about looking at the relationship between what it takes to insure you and how long will it last. So if you can imagine then, if we know that, for example, if we know that on your water heater, that we have all the data in insurance, and we know that in the State Farm where I work for, there was one little implement that would flood when you left, right? Well, you improved that implement. And so those things, everything from smart roofs, when they are due to go out, then you have a signal. So rather than having a flooded house, through a bad roof, well, then your insurance company notifies you that it needs to be fixed. So instead of having a big insurance bill of, $3,000, then you have a smaller bill. So certainly everything has to do with underwriting. Everything insurance has to say, how can we look at Andreas in the future and put him in a pool The biggest problems the insurance companies will have is that cars will stop bumping into each other. When cars stop bumping into each other and your book of business is based on people having accidents, even the implement now that they have on the blind spot on cars that light up when you want to switch lanes has really reduced the amount of accidents. So anything having to do with data about projecting the future, about knowing how many accidents that would take place at the corner of 7 and X Street, right? About knowing what's going on in your house with the water pipes. All of those things that cause insurance companies sleepless nights will now become database. And it would be a marvelous thing for the American consumer. It'd be a marvelous thing for the insurance company.
Do we have time for me to?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So one of our partners, they instrument high-rise buildings for the HVAC systems paid by the insurance company, because
Absolutely.
what happens is now if there's a flood in the high-rise, they know immediately and they can mitigate it, localize it, and the cost of the claim is so much cheaper. So the people get a reduction on their insurance bill.
Absolutely.
And the insurance companies actually make more margin. Right. So it's a win-win for everybody. So usage-based insurance is a huge opportunity for IoT, and it's certainly for things like leak detection and, things that really a water leak detector in a basement is not that high tech, or in a attic, to your point, for the roof. Not that high tech. It can be done inexpensively, and EveryNet's technology does make that possible.
Right.
Can you imagine if we had a sensor for Llewellyn's brain? Can you imagine with me? That we had a sensor for
edge processing. It needs edge processing
patterns, so that he could just wake up in the morning and his great columns would automatically be written on all the knowledge.
I hate to tell you, but most of the time it would record nothing.
Well, Lawrence, I have to tell you, it is too bad that the time has flown. I enjoy very much you being with us today. I want to thank you profusely for what you're doing in driving your team to execution. I wish you an amazing journey in 2022. We'll do everything we can to help with the Texas market and then some. And I hope that everything that you're planning works out really well. And guys, any parting thoughts for Lawrence?
Lawrence, I'd just like to.
I've sent you the data on social physics and the history of it. Use it as you please. And good luck.
Thank you very much. And I did take notes. I don't know if you could tell, but I'm going to read that. Thank you. That's a good tip. Llewellyn?
Thank you very much, Lawrence. You're fascinating, and this has been a great having you tremendously.
Well,
Lawrence,
thank you. You guys, I've enjoyed it. You guys have been interesting. It was not what I expected, and to the good side. So it was very entertaining, and we appreciate our partnership with Cedars. We do take it very seriously. I know we've joked around a little bit here today, but it has the opportunity to be a game changer, not just for Texas, but also for the rest of the U.S. along with our network and the other technologies you're working with, and we greatly appreciate it.
Absolutely. All the best. Johnny, take us away.
Yeah, we'll do Llewellyn's favorite song here today. It's always now. Nothing ever goes away. Everything is here to stay. It's always now. It's always now. There never was a used to be. Everything is here with me. And it's always now. So brace your heart. Find yourself some sanity. It's really only you and me. And it's always now.
Excellent. We're done recording.